right. Well, for those of you who I don't know, I'm Dave Court, the Executive Director of the Community Center, and I'm just looking so forward to tonight, and we're just so thrilled to have such wonderful panelists and guests tonight. And Alexa will be introducing everybody, but just incredible partners of the Community Center. And I just am really excited that this great experience we've had over the last 6 weeks in reading Ibram X. Kendi's book and having this panel on racial justice tonight. So I just want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us. And we are just thrilled for tonight and really look forward to moving into more community and learning as time passes by. So I'll hand it back to Alexa, and I just really wanted to just give a huge standing O to Alexa for organizing the entire Community Unlearning and organizing tonight's event. So thank you, Alexa, and take it away.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks everyone for being here. So tonight is a moderated panel discussion. So I'm going to be walking us through a conversation with our panelists, who I will introduce here shortly. But at the end, I'm hoping to have some time for questions from the audience. So if you have questions, please put those in the chat throughout the whole session. And Jack Sayers, our awesome operations director, is going to be scanning through those questions and sending me some questions to ask at the end of the discussion. So make sure they go into that chat box. I won't be able to take live questions, just it will be a little too much to manage. So we'll be monitoring that chat. As well, if you could just make sure you keep yourself on mute throughout the evening. If you have any urgent questions, you can raise your hand, and I will try to see that, but we'll work through it together. So I wanted to start by reading a segment of our statement that we released to our community after the murder of George Floyd, and it's our commitment to equity and racial justice. So we choose solidarity over silence. We stand with the Black Lives Matter movement and those across the United States who are making their voices heard, shouting loudly that racism is unacceptable. In a country built upon colonialism, slavery, and privilege, we must do our part in dismantling these systems of oppression. We commit to examining how we can create an actively anti-racist organization. Tonight, you are joining us on this journey, and thank you for being here. So I wanted to tell you a little bit first about what the Community Unlearning program is. Some of you have been participating in the community read, which has been an awesome experience, but we acknowledge that every day we continue to learn and grow. And in fact, that's what led us to create the Community Unlearning program. And as a community center, one of our strengths has always been community education and community building. And in this time, we chose to stick with our strengths and develop a program for community centered around racial justice and equity education. And the Community Unlearning program aims to re-educate and bring awareness to our communities about the realities of racism and discrimination. And like I said, our first action with this program was to develop the community read of the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. And in a hopeful turn of events, we had over 177 people register to participate in this program. And each week we had 45 to 65 people Zooming in for a discussion. And so we have tonight, this discussion is our next event in this series. We're also going to be having a film discussion of 13th next week at 6:30, the same time. We're going to have an upcoming community read, which will be starting on September 9th. We're still picking our book. And down the line, we're going to have a community unlearning discussion with Royce McLemore on September 16th, who is very involved with the Golden Gate Village project happening in Marin City and the housing advocacy happening there. So you can look forward to those things. So now to introduce our panelists, I want to welcome Chandra, Alexandre, Jonathan, Logan, and Don Carney. I'm going to read a little bio on each of them, and I'll give them a chance to introduce themselves as well. So welcome, Chandra. Chandra is the Chief Executive Officer of Community Action Marin, and she's a seasoned nonprofit executive and fund development professional with 20 years of experience supporting organizations to social justice outcome. Her work has helped strengthen regional affordable housing and early childhood education initiatives, expand education reform strategies nationally, and resource grass-led movement building for global women's rights. She has taught both full-time and part-time in the University of San Francisco's Masters of Nonprofit Administration program, which is where I had the privilege of meeting Chandra for the first time as a student in her class. And Chandra's commitment to equity serves her well at Community Action Marin, where board and staff are standing with low-income families and individuals struggling to find opportunity and fulfill their dreams in challenging times. Her vision is to help propel local efforts to eradicate disparities forward while promoting self-sufficiency for all in the county that has the largest inequities between racial groups in California. Doing this will require a healing-centered approach that brings awareness of community trauma to the fore. Under her leadership, Community Action Marin will continue to provide the high-quality services to meet community needs while also fostering and advocating for a thriving Marin County. So thank you for being here, Chandra. Also here tonight, we have Jonathan Logan. Jonathan is the VP of Community Engagement with the Marin Community Foundation. He joined MCF in 2016, initially in the role of Special Assistant to the President, and soon after segueing to Vice President for Community Engagement. He brings a wide range of skills with 11 years of local government and community development leadership experience. He has served on various nonprofit and local government boards and commissions. Jonathan is a National Urban Fellow and holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Business Management and a Master's in Public Administration degree from City University of New York, Burridge College. Thank you, Jonathan, for being here. We also have Don Carney. Don Carney has worked in the field of juvenile social justice for over 45 years. He started his career in 1975 directing group homes and educational services for wards of the court. Don produced the No More Scapegoats exhibit, providing diversity trainings for thousands of Bay Area youth. The exhibit contrasted the dangers of stereotyping and exclusion with the wisdom and power of inclusion. In 2000, Don became Director of Youth and Family Services for the YMCA, where he recruited and trained mentors, supervised probation youth at Marin's community school, and during the summers, he directed a residential camp for trauma-impacted youth. In 2004, Don established the Marin County Youth Court, where he developed the alcohol and drug safety skills harm reduction training in 2008, he created a suspension diversion program based on the principles of restorative and trauma-informed practices that is currently practiced in many Marin schools. Don is a member of the Superior Court's Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Commission, which I have the privilege of serving as the co-chair with Don on that commission. He also serves on several community drug prevention coalitions. The Youth Court has been at the forefront of disrupting the school-to-prison pipeline by deploying restorative trauma-informed practices that keep youth in school and out of the juvenile justice system. This innovative program has diverted over 1,300 youth from the juvenile justice system. Don trains communities and schools in the practice of providing restorative trauma-informed alternatives to suspension, expulsion, and juvenile incarceration. Thank you, Don, for being here. So I'm going to pass it over to our panelists now. I wanted to start with a quick introduction. If you could tell us about yourself and what inspires you in the fight for racial justice. And I'm going to start with Jonathan.
Cool. First off, thank you, Alexa and Dave, for the invitation. This is a great forum, and I love the way you guys set it up. This is just an extension of what community centers do, you know, and having been a community center guy, I can really appreciate this notion of having a destination for folks to come, build community, learn together, and grow together. And so this is just a great forum, and happy to be a part tonight. When I think about how I like to describe myself these days, and some of you have heard this already, I introduce myself as Booker's grandson, John and Carolyn's son, Amber's husband, Axe and Ailey's dad. And having that point of reference and understanding my connection in this world through family is really how I stay grounded, how I make sense of a lot of the world, and also stay inspired for the future. Just a quick story I'll tell just to kick it off, and this ties into what inspires me to continue to fight for racial justice. My grandfather, Booker, who I mentioned just a moment ago, he built a home in unincorporated Solano County, right outside of the Vallejo city limits, where I actually grew up. And I know you guys being out in unincorporated Marin, you understand that as residents in this special area, you also have special rules, and certain rules that apply in cities don't actually apply to you. And so my grandfather, being from Arkansas, a country boy, as he would put it, he loved horses, and he was a cowboy growing up. And so one of the things that he loved about living in unincorporated Solano County was the fact that he could have horses. And I remember, you know, being in middle school, he had 4 horses, a Tennessee Walker, a quarter horse, and 2 Shetland ponies. And we would ride, my grandfather, myself, and 2 brothers. And I remember one time I'm riding Rondo, the quarter horse, and Rondo was a really great horse, but every now and again he would buck. And so this particular time he bucked, and I fell off, and I must have been in the 7th grade. And my grandfather, without skipping a beat, jumped off of Spirit, which was the Tennessee Walker, tied him to the post, and told me right away, get back on the horse and hold on as tight as you can, and don't let go. That was kind of his words to me. Get back on the horse and don't let go. And that story continues to inspire me today, and really point to you know, some similarities as it relates to the fight for racial justice in this country and beyond. You know, the journey is smooth at times, and it feels like we're moving in the right direction. And then we have moments like, you know, the recent murder of George Floyd, where, you know, the horse was bucking, and is actually not as rare as we would hope. These things happen all the time, but this happened to be a moment in time where we were all, you know, quarantining, and we saw it and had a chance to really grapple with what it meant for our country. But the inspiration for me comes in, you know, this notion of getting up, getting back on, and holding on tight, continuing the fight. And so that's what keeps me motivated, in addition to the 2 little ones that I mentioned earlier, my kids. They have to live in this world. And to the extent that I can be a part of creating the future that I want them to live in, I'm going to continue to push and make that push and stand the fight.
Thank you, Jonathan. Chandra, on to you.
Thank you. Echoing the appreciation for this forum, I am really delighted to be with you tonight, and I really want to give thanks to Dave, to Alexa, to the community for the book read, for showing up, and for taking one day at a time and putting one foot in front of the other. I think the inspiration for me comes in a willingness to take the next step, and perhaps not knowing where that next step is going to lead, and being willing to hold the tension of the moment between ourselves and where we are and the next frontier of our own personal growth and development. My inspiration comes in seeing minds open, in seeing language change, and seeing people who have new ideas, expressing those ideas, creating space at that proverbial table. And I think really being willing to be authentic in who they are and how they do this work. I think that I bring in myself a lot of my grandmother and my grandmother's grandmother to this conversation, and a long line of women who were willing to put one step in front of the other, who coming from Puerto Rico saw opportunity and saw incredible challenge, and who decided to do the next thing that they knew how to do, and to do it with song, and to do it with dance, and to do it with story, and to continue to pass on a wisdom that I feel very blessed to have inherited, and I pass that on to my daughter. And so, like Jonathan, I too carry the spirit of my daughter, of my ancestors, and in particular of my female line into this conversation, just recognizing that the way in which they showed up as women in the world, and just honoring the recent 100th anniversary of suffrage in this country for women, thinking about the realities that we faced and the long ways, yes, that we've come, but also that we still have to go. So what inspires me is the decision that we make in a moment to take that next right step. So I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandra. Appreciate that. And Dawn. Well, that's not.
Is everybody hearing that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Somebody on the call's not muted.
So thanks for inviting me, folks. I love the community center. Spent a lot of time with you folks. Really appreciate the opportunity to share the work I do. Couple of things became evident to me quite a while ago. Is I was a kid who grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. My mother was 15. My father was an alcoholic. And I've been able to get somewhere, not because I'm all that special, but because I've got a lot of white privilege. So I want to put that right out there and own it. And the thing that inspires me is seeing marginalized youth thrive when they're given the right supports. Through my group home days and through working with kids at Carney community and working through young people with the youth court, I see a lot of young people that people have written off, and I've seen them thrive given the proper supports, and that motivates me to stay in the fight. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Dawn. Appreciate that. Appreciate you all being here. I'm going to, oops. So we have a couple really big questions tonight, and I understand that we might not be able to get as deep as we want to, but we're going to touch on some really important things. So our first question is, in the Race Counts report released in 2017, Marin County received the title of the most racially disparate county in California. The report cited criteria like denying proposals for affordable housing, maintaining decade-long segregation in schools and neighborhoods, incarcerating Black people at a rate 14 times higher than white people, and denying the necessary resources to the communities that need them most. Can you give some context to the racial inequities in Marin County that you see in your work and your life? And let's start with Chandra.
Thanks, Alexa. I think the most obvious one for me right now that we can't ignore given COVID-19 is the incredible inequities and the impact of the pandemic on our Latino community. When we look at just the rates of infection from the virus, when we look at the treatment, when we look at, meaning the testing, rather, when we look at just the ways in which the systemic and structural racism has created an environment where our Latino community is disproportionately impacted. It's astounding, it's horrifying, and I think in this moment it's something that we can't ignore. I think when we look at essential workers in the county, we look at who is showing up day in and day out. When we talk about the privilege of those who can make choices about what they do and how they do it, and those who can't, we see race as a glaring inequity that continues to perpetuate the challenge. So I think right now that would be what I would highlight. I think the pandemic previously, I think most recently in the news, we've really heard about the impact of COVID-19 in the Latino community, but I think when we look at the racial inequity in the county from shelter in place even, and when we talk about the essential workforce, the veil lifting off of childcare workers and other essential workers and looking at low-wage workers throughout the county, it's become really evident that Marin has some incredible challenges. And given that we are between 70 and 80% white, and looking at the disproportionate impacts of shelter in place on our community economically, let alone in terms of the physical well-being of individuals and families, it's something that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Chandra. Yeah, I read something really interesting that said we need to be so careful when we say that our Black and Brown communities are more susceptible to COVID-19. It's that's the racism that is causing that, and I think that that's such an important point. And thank you for bringing that up. Mm-hmm. Dawn, on to you for the same question.
Where I see racism manifest in my workplace is that youth of color are disproportionately targeted by law enforcement in the community and by SROs in the school. And most of the kids I work with suffer a large amount of trauma. And in our culture, we punish kids for exhibiting trauma behavior rather than treat it. And I see that as clearly a racist approach. A lot of the white kids get therapy and support, where the kids of color get punished for being traumatized. And disproportionate resources for the schools. The schools that are most impacted have the least resources, and we have very few teachers from the cultural background of the kids they're teaching in these marginalized schools. So those are the biggest places I see that manifesting.
Thanks, Dawn. Jonathan, same question.
Yeah, so when that report came out in 2017, my first reaction, frankly, was duh. I didn't know it was as bad, and compared to other counties. But I've been coming to Marin County since 1984 for church. My dad pastors a church in Marin City. I went to high school here. I spent 12 years as the general manager of the Marin City Community Services District, and got to work with some really great partners and community members fighting to right many of the historic wrongs that existed in the county. So that was my first reaction. I was kind of like, who didn't know? But I realized that some folks actually didn't know. They didn't know how bad it was. Marin City was a community that, if you live north of Mill Valley and you worked in the city, you literally just drove by it every single day. Or maybe it was a place that, the wonderful flea market used to exist, or the place where you could go to Best Buy back in the day and purchase your electronic devices. And so I realized that some folks didn't actually know how bad it was because they had not been proximate to it. They knew it existed. They may have read a story in the IJ about, a disparity here, a disparity there. They knew public housing existed in the community, but didn't really get close enough to the problem to really understand what it all meant and what their role was in helping to address the issue. And so when I think about this question, where it takes me to is just the opportunity. Now that so many folks, their eyes have been opened to the structural challenges that have existed, not just in Marin County, but beyond. and really taking a look at what is it that can be done at this point to ensure that whenever this study is done again, Marin County doesn't have that awful distinction as being the most disparate county in California. The other thing that I'll say about it, just in terms of how it manifests in my work, we see it in just, in every single aspect of life. And one of the most harmful impacts of racism, both conscious and unconscious, structural and individualized, is just the fact that there are lower standards for how certain people should experience life or experience the public good based on race. And so, for me, that's really what I think we should all be striving to do, is to shift the narrative around that. And I think, what you guys are doing out here is great, and positive steps in that direction, shifting the narrative, really understanding what's the role of each and every one of us as individuals and collectively as a society to ensure that race is not the determinant factor for if someone gets a quality education or gets access to housing that they can afford. And it, this moment seems to be prime for these types of conversations, mixed in with some excellent policy solutions that we can collectively work towards in order to make sure that we have a more equitable community that we live in, that our kids grow up in. And I think it could be a really beautiful thing.
Can I jump on that a little bit, Alexa? Is that all right?
Of course.
I just want to add and underscore something, Jonathan, that you said, and that is really this is an opportunity, right? The data are a real challenge for those who didn't know, and even for those who do know now and see the data. There's a lot of folks out there who don't want to believe the truth of the data and what that actually means for people's lives. And one of the things that I want to point to is really us turning to this as an opportunity and looking at the incredible affluence in Marin County and the incredible opportunity it therefore gives us to point resources, direct individuals' efforts, and start to unleash the power of what the affluence can help manifest if all of us are putting our shoulder to the same wheel for social change, for social justice.
Thank you, Chandra. This tees up to my next question, which is, the fight for racial justice is not a new fight. We've seen similar uprisings in our nation and our communities before. What makes this time different, and how do we ensure that this fight does not become a moment in time, but rather a sustained movement that affects real change? And Dawn, I'll start with you.
Well, I think there's a couple of things that laid the foundation for this transition. One is technology. We get to see how police treat people of color and how, unfortunately, sometimes they murder them. So that's a big difference. The other is that when George Floyd was murdered, we were all sequestered and had to watch, couldn't turn your eyes away. So I think those two, the confluence of those two were very powerful. I think that as far as sustaining this effort, I think it's great to see a lot of young people of all colors standing up for inclusion and against racism. So, and I think continuing that and being in the streets, it struck me when I read Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. She made a self-criticism at the end of the book that the movement had made an error in relying on the courts rather than staying in the streets. So I think we absolutely need to stay in the street. And then I also think what's very different now is challenging paradigms of domination. For an example, defunding the police. What a radical idea. And the police are a mechanism of domination, individual cops could be fine sometimes, but the structure of policing is a hierarchical structure to support the status quo. And taking a good look at that and dismantling that, unpacking that, and demanding that we do things differently and parse out what police narrowly should be focused on, and taking the other aspects of what they do, like SROs, and put that towards counselors, social workers, people who have a professional background in supporting young people.
Thank you, Don. Chandra.
Sure. I think that it is a unique moment in time. I think it's a little bit of a, I don't know, call it a flashpoint, a little bit of a coming together of the things that Don has already mentioned. I think that it's also coming at a time where we're hearing more activists, we're seeing more activists, we're years and years of Black Lives Matter, years and years of grassroots, people of color, BIPOC-led, women-led, young people-led movements that are helping to galvanize thought and opposition. And so, we're definitely seeing a moment in time where there's this increased awareness about the challenges and the intersection of those challenges, racial and economic justice, racial justice, the justice for women's rights, and those intersections. And I think that it's a time when we're seeing that sustained in ways that are promoting conflict and in some cases conflagration, as Don also mentioned. And because of that, we are continuing to sort of foment energy around the conversation. So I think it's different now. And I think to ensure that spaces like this that are safe for people to come forward truthfully and fully, both in ignorance and in commitment toward making a difference and sustaining that difference, is critically important. I would say there are 4 things that are required. And I think that in thinking about sustainability, we can't ignore any of them. And the first is really the personal commitment to do the work, to show up, to own voice, to own privilege, and to continue to remove the veils or the onion skin layers, whatever makes sense for you, but to deepen your commitment to what it's going to take for you to show up in spaces where conversations about race are going to happen and can happen, and you can help to instigate them. So that's one, the personal transformational work. The second is really to help to continue conversations in community in order to foster shifting of norms so that groups of people increasingly are having different kinds of conversations. So the book club idea is one great idea, because I'm sure through that process in community, you're lifting up and creating different narratives and different kinds of dialogue to create new norms that are acceptable within the containers of that community. And I think that work needs to continue. And I think it's also, incredibly important for us to provide access to opportunities and to conversations to lift up voices that haven't been heard, and to bring people to the table in order to participate when those spaces have formerly been closed. So it's not just the opportunities, but it's the access to those opportunities that's important. And then finally, it really is policy and legal change. And so if we can do those 4 things, starting with personal transformation and ending with policy change, then we will have a sustainable movement that's founded in the work of racial justice and anti-racist society.
Thank you so much. Jonathan.
Great. I want to pick up on 2 things that Chandra and Don mentioned, just about youth being so connected to this work and so involved with the protests. They are going to sustain the movement. That's my hope. That's my proclamation. That's my prophecy. They are going to sustain the movement. They have stepped up to the plate during this time. They're leading rallies. They're creating the very necessary tension that needs to exist to really push up against the status quo. And to Chandra's point of spaces like this being created to learn together, it furthers this notion of healthy tension within our society. And so this work is not going to be easy. It's uncomfortable at times, but that is what the work is. That is what we have to sustain. That's how you create a fire. You strike a match. That healthy tension is what we need, and that's what will sustain the work. Continuing to have these types of dialogues, but not just keeping it in the realm of just an interesting conversation, but thinking through, like, what does it take to translate some of these ideas into policy solutions that we can all collectively then push for and ensure that our community has the types of policies and structures that don't merit people based on race. And I think that's what the huge opportunity is at this point. The other thing I would say is that, a big hope of mine is that we figure out ways to get as proximate to other folks as possible. So figure out how do we make the connections in Marin City if you're not from that community, and if you've never connected with folks from that community. How do you start to build those bridges? How do you make relationships and develop relationships in the canal? How do you embrace folks from other communities in your community as a way to just get close to each other, learn the stories? I can't help you if I don't know anything about you, and it's kind of with that understanding, and I can't be supported if you don't know about me. And so it's a two-way street. I think sometimes we think about this idea of creating like an anti-racist community as being a one-way street, but it actually makes us all better. It makes a more healthy community. The more diverse we are, and the more engaged and included everyone that's here feels and are. And so that's kind of my dream and hope. I actually don't know what's different about this time, but I just have those as kind of some hopes and feelings about what is possibly different. And, I'm going to continue to keep working with it. And I'm happy to be engaged with you guys doing the same.
Can I add a piece? Sorry, I keep jumping in again.
Go for it.
It's a great conversation. And one of the things that I would ask people to think about is who in the community, who is the person or what is the place where the spaces are held? So like the community center or a faith-based leader, for example, the people who are responsible for helping to grow youth up and hold those spaces in confidence, and their trust is paramount in the community. So those are the people who I think we need to support. We need to come together with and around if we want to have different kinds of conversations. So whether it's the community center or a religious leader or a youth mentor, if we can really think about who are the people who are who have that trust to lend to us in these ongoing conversations, I would say that would be a really important place to start.
Thank you, Chandra. Yeah, and I based on something that Jonathan said around policy change as a way to really make an impact, that was what Kendi focused on in his book almost entirely. He said that you can't even call yourself an activist unless you have a proven record of real policy change. And so our next question really focuses on that area. How do we move away from responding to the symptoms of racism and towards addressing the systems and policies that uphold and perpetuate racism in our county? What areas of policy change are you most interested in seeing changed, and how does a community rally around such change? And Jonathan, can we start with you this time?
Sure. So I think housing is at the top of my list, and there's not a lot of distance from a lot of other things, but if I had to pick one policy that I think has a tremendous or would have a tremendous impact on, us addressing racism in our community, it would be around housing. How do you create, and I see it in two ways. You have to create opportunities where people live currently. So I think in Marin City, people who live there, they're not interested in moving to other places. They want maybe more investment in their community and into the resources there, but they love their community, just like everyone on this webinar tonight. You guys love your community, so that's no different. I think what folks would ask for is just investment to improve the facilities and living conditions in some cases, amenities, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think outside of the communities where folks of color live and are concentrated in this county, this notion of creating additional housing opportunities for folks is huge. You should have a choice as it relates to where you live and what school you send your kids to. And if we can address the housing issue, I think, just by the sheer fact that we'll be living closer, races will be living closer to each other, a lot of those barriers come down. Where I grew up in Vallejo, across the street from the house that I grew up in, was a Hispanic family right next door. To my left was a Black family. To the right was a Black family. 2 doors down across the street was a Filipino family. And we just had an extremely diverse neighborhood. And so we played Little League baseball together. We rode bikes together. And it was unusual, very unusual, just not to see a rainbow of folks in neighborhoods for me, because that's just not what I was used to. And it gave me an appreciation for different cultures. And I saw, the systems that impacted them obviously would impact me, because we were right there. The policies that impacted them would impact me. And so we all had a vested interest in making sure that our communities had what they need. And I think that's a huge, that's a huge issue in Marin that we can actually do something about. That's the good news, is that we can do something about it.
Thanks so much. Dawn.
Well, I'm going to focus around kids in schools. I think we ought to subsidize housing for teachers of color, so we have more teachers of color in schools. It's really tough for young people not to see themselves in those who are teaching them. I worked with a young woman once. She got a opportunity to take a summer course in LA, and she was a struggling student. And she came back and said, "This is the first time I've had a teacher that looked like me." And I made an A because I cared a lot. So it had a big impact. And what they pay teachers, teachers can't afford to move here if they don't have some kind of underwriting for their housing. And I'm chiming in with all the kids about removing school resource officers from schools. School resource, having somebody in a uniform, armed, on a school campus, number one, triggers a lot of kids who live in communities where there isn't positive relationships with police. And I think it also subtly tells us that we cannot solve our own problems without men with weapons making a decision for us. And that really grates against my sense of community. And I want to encourage schools to use restorative justice and trauma-informed care rather than suspending and expelling students. We have a huge disparity with who gets suspended and expelled in this county. And what that does is kids tend to self-label themselves failures. Traumatized kids trigger easily. And because they trigger easily, they're quickly labeled defiant, non-compliant, and delinquent. And because they internalize these labels, they can self-identify their strengths, and they don't tend to have adults helping them self-identify their strengths. But they most certainly do have strengths, and we have to leverage that. And I would call for a policy that encourages trauma screening early in life and trauma treatment early in life, so young people don't have to suffer that trauma for their entire lives.
Thank you, Don. Yeah, I can reflect. I grew up in Marin County, and we did a equity training at the community center last year. And one of the questions they asked was, when was the first time you had a teacher of a different race than you? And it wasn't until college. And that was astounding to learn that and recognize that I had never had those types of role models in my classroom. And I really was seeing kind of one type of teacher, one type of leader. And I think that learning that and unpacking that and recognizing that we're seeing that in schools still is a huge issue to address. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Chandra, I'll ask you the same questions.
Yes to Jonathan and yes to Don. And the one that I would add is supporting early childhood education. We need preschool for all. We need to ensure that kids across the county, across the state, and across the nation have access to high quality early childhood care, education, and that we're paying the caregivers traditionally and very, very much the case in the work that I do and the work that I know in the county. It's the work of Latinas. It's the work of women of color in our communities who are supporting the economy by allowing a safe and good space for little ones 0 to 5 and school age to be educated, to grow up, to develop, and get their parents to work or to school. And we don't do enough to support our community. And that's the backbone. That's the fabric of our society right there. And I think if we're talking about one thing that the pandemic has helped us to realize across this country, it's how much we need early childhood education and care, and how little we have done to make it something that people can do and still live in Marin County, for example. We have a cost of living here that we well know for a family of 4 is at least $26 an hour if we're looking at sustainability index reports. And we're paying through the California Department of Education, we're able to pay our early childhood workers in state subsidized programs, maybe $15 an hour, and it's not possible. And so then you get the crowding conditions in housing that don't help when people need other kinds of care, such as for their physical well-being. So I would point to ECE, and I think the possibilities for helping to support the educational needs of that workforce in and through to an AA and a BA and a teaching credential, if they want to have a forward career path, is also something that we can think about. And I know that there are many of us as part of the Marin Promise Partnership who are looking at equity and education issues and also looking at possibilities and potentials for those kinds of pathways. But I think we really need to look hard and long at our early childhood education workforce.
Thank you, Chandra. So I'm going to move on to some questions from the audience and for all our participants here. I want to start with a follow-up on housing policy. So Jonathan, perhaps you can jump in first, but what government policy changes could be most effective in addressing the housing crisis or lack of affordable housing in the county?
Yeah, so policies around zoning and just how land is used is the main policy lever that county government, cities and towns would have. And so looking at the community and understanding where housing could and should be developed based on proximity to amenities, not doing undue damage to the environment. Those are the types of things that, we should be considering, and then identifying where is it acceptable for housing to be built, and then do the necessary zoning changes where where zoning is an issue, and once that's done, you have really great nonprofit developers that could come in, take a look, and develop a plan for developing a site that would really fit the fit the community, and I just think that we have we have a lot of challenges, and the public process for some of this has frankly got in the way of development in the past. There have been some state law changes that make it a little bit easier to get things done, but it still isn't a perfect system, and so we have to continue to just kind of push there to ensure that things are zoned for housing. I think the other issue that obviously will come up is just the cost, and so how do you make some of these projects pencil out that in Marin, with the the cost of land being so expensive, what is the policy levers that could be used to help alleviate some of the costs associated with projects, density bonuses, actual financial subsidies, things like that. We've been involved with just about any and every affordable housing project in the county, MCF that is, and we're often one of the first investors that a nonprofit developer would look to, because we're willing to front the cost for pre-development, essentially taking the risk of really studying the land, understanding and assessing what's possible for development, and that's a portion of the project, a phase of a housing development project that many developers just won't take on, especially if they don't have a whole lot of confidence, given history, that a project is going to get approved and actually built. And so we've often been the first investor to take much of that risk out of that early and initial assessment. And I think figuring out how do we do that as a community and become more inviting. We have to keep our principles, and be sure that what's being developed makes sense for Marin. I know that's a sensitive topic, but I strongly believe that there's enough land and viable land for development to happen that will create affordable housing for more people.
Thank you, Jonathan. A question, I'll direct this one to Chandra. How will we measure progress in racial justice? What are some useful sources of on-the-ground data apart from census that will help us know our country is mitigating racial disparities? What will you be looking for to know that we've made progress?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we talked about the Race Counts report, I believe they are looking at doing another one, and my hope would be they would be funded to do another one, and we could have that really deep dive into data. I think what we're going to start to hear is the voices of people and the stories, and you're going to start to hear the anecdotes of when people did achieve access to an opportunity they didn't have access to before, when somebody is able to create a mind shift in their community, and people are getting behind a specific proposition or a policy objective. So I think you're going to start to hear the voices on the ground before you're going to start to see other forms of data. But I think what we have to do is really pay attention to that qualitative data, much as we might a census report where that data is important. I think the other thing that we're going to need to look at is the upcoming election and the census currently how many people are participating? Are we exceeding 2010 levels for being counted in the census? Have we been successful in doing that? We're going to start to see early indicators if the civic engagement actions that we're taking now are going to be deemed successful in the immediate and the longer term future vis-a-vis those mechanisms. So when we talk about success, it's what are the boots on the ground doing now in order to make those kinds of things happen, to ensure that everyone is counted, that people are getting out to vote, that people are registered to vote. So I think it's going to be in the stories. It's going to be initially in those kinds of data, and then further down, my hope is that it's going to be from our partners and think tanks who are producing the kinds of reports, and foundations included, producing the kinds of reports where we're going to see that evidence compiled. So I am as much interested in what's possible now to keep civic engagement going, to produce those kinds of results, as well as to ensure that we're sharing resources with one another.
Thanks, Chandra. And Dawn, what will you be looking for in terms of improving schools and youth equity in the county?
Well, I think Chandra brought up a very important thing. I'd like to see 100% of the little ones getting what they need when they're little. And right now, that's not happening. And those building blocks are absolutely essential to thrive later in life. So that would be number one. Ensuring young people complete high school. I work with a lot of young people who don't complete high school. And right now, our focus is pretty much on young people getting into college and doing that. But we have a whole sector of young people that get shuttled aside who need to complete high school, because your likelihood, if you don't complete high school, of ending up incarcerated is quite large. So that's another piece. And working with schools to make relationships the center of the school experience. If a young person has good relationships at school with their peers and other adults, then their likelihood to do well with the academics increases enormously. So I'm lucky enough to be working with Santa Fe School District. It's making a huge paradigm shift in that arena. And their alternative school, they're dedicating resources to shifting from a punitive culture that suspends to a culture that's restorative and heals. And they're quite serious about that, and they're putting resources behind it.
Thank you, Dawn. So a question for all of you. This question comes from Peter in our gallery here. What are your thoughts on reparations, and how might reparations look? And what is the best way to get there, to an acceptance of and a support for specific reparation proposals? And we'll start with Jonathan.
Yeah, so I support reparations. I think the notion that harm has been done for many years, not on accident, but intentional harm has been done to block opportunities for folks, that are descendants of slaves. The racism that exists in America was built as a system, and we can see it through many of the policies that are in place right now. That's just the facts, and we could walk through, in more detail in a different, forum of just proof that that's the case. But take my word for it tonight that that's the case. And so the question is, well, if that is in fact truth, what do we do to repair that harm? And some form of reparations is I think necessary, both in terms of the healing process, but also in order to alleviate and start to address much of the disparities that we see. Now, the form in which reparations come or would be delivered, that's for smarter people than me to sort of lay out policies for what that looks like. But I think it needs to certainly be a discussion, that is debated and discussed, and the long-term impacts of reparation needs to be understood, so that whatever we're doing in this moment is actually, addressing the issues that we are hoping that it will address. And that's, like I said, smarter people than me will continue to develop policy proposals for what that looks like. And I think, in terms of building support for it, it's really, I think people have to come to grips with just that, there were intentional things done, and we have to repair that harm. And many of us that, we're living right now, we possibly didn't have anything to do with it, but at some level we're benefiting from it. And so the question is, how do we make that right? And unless we figure out ways to make that right, we will never actually completely fulfill our quest for creating, a community that's free of bias and inequities. I just don't see how we get there.
And Jonathan, before I move on from you, I know that
I see a comment there about college for all African Americans, and that's one of those policies proposals that's out there, and I could dig it, and there's possibly other things, housing, loan programs, down payment assistance. We know in America your house is one of your greatest assets in terms of building wealth, particularly if you're moving from a lower income family to the middle class. That is one of the ways in which you build wealth. Just having access to a down payment for a home, it prevents many people from even entering the job market, even though they're potentially paying more, or not the job market, housing market, even though they're potentially paying more to rent their house than what it would cost to purchase. And so there's a lot of different proposals that I think need to be vetted and understood, and it may even be more of a toolkit versus one specific policy solution. But some other folks are going to grapple with it, and I think we'll start to see more concrete proposals starting to emerge and be debated and discussed.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. And before I move on from you, I know that your colleague, Barbara Clifton-Zarate, has talked to us a bit about her ideas around universal basic income. Do you think that could be connected to this conversation of reparations?
Yeah, it could. It certainly could be. This idea that, some of the jobs that pay living wages, we're not seeing them because of outsourcing, and now automation. Those good paying jobs are going away, and so this question of how do we address sort of this widening gap of the haves and the have-nots. Universal basic income is one way to think about that. I think the interesting part of UBI pilot is really understanding what the positive impacts of some a policy like UBI could mean for our community. So what's the impact of a UBI on a mother with children? Just by the mere fact that she has enough money to, raise her kids or handle an emergency, what's the impact on her kid and their education or the mental health of the family by having that resource available? And so I think that's where it gets really interesting, is just understanding what the true impact is, and that's what a pilot would seek to better understand. By supporting families with unrestricted income, universal, how does that make our society better, and individual families, how does that put them in a position to thrive? So really exciting work. There's several pilots happening around the globe. Actually, I just saw something recently in Germany. They're testing out a pilot. Finland did a pilot out, back in 2017. Stockton, the city of Stockton has a pilot that's active, actually coming to a close pretty soon. And the city of Oakland is considering a pilot. So there's these pilots that are popping up, and it's providing some really interesting data about, what the real impact of a universal basic income would be. And this was actually a concept advocated for by Dr. King. This notion that everyone should be entitled just by virtue of the fact that you're a human. Human dignity says you should be entitled to, food, quality housing, clothes, education, just kind of those basic fundamental things that we all expect for ourselves. Everybody should be entitled to those things. And so UBI is potentially one way to achieve that.
Thank
And
you,
I saw
John.
the comment, what is UBI? UBI is Universal Basic Income. Thanks, Dave. I see the HBO Stockton on my mind. It's a great documentary that gives more information on the power of a UBI.
Thanks, Jonathan. Chandra or Dawn, anything to add on reparations?
I will. I'll jump in really quickly. Just a couple of thoughts. One is yes. Yeah, all the reasons that Jonathan has mentioned and more, and for our Indigenous communities as well, just to really be thinking about, what's the history, what's the land that we're standing on, how did we get here? I think that, there are a couple of things. One is there's an evidence base for what people do with cash assistance in times of need. And we've got it in our own backyard right now with COVID-19. And thank you to Marin Community Foundation. Thank you to the County of Marin. Thank you to many funders in the county for stepping up to provide our community with what it needs. The evidence base says that when people are given cash, they do the right thing, because the fear has always been, well, where's that money going to go? They put glasses on their child's face who needs to be able to read their homework. They buy food to put on the table. They take care of medical bills. They take care of necessities for their families. So I think there's not a long jump, in addition to the pilots that Jonathan mentioned, to understanding that right now we have in our community incredible evidence that says that giving people the resources that they need to thrive and become self-sufficient, they work. And so to be able to do that would be an important step forward for us. The other thing is, I think that it's really going to take a huge shift in mindset. There's so much of this work, and we've got to have the hard conversations. We've got to create these spaces to come together and ask the difficult questions. And I got to say, if you want sort of an education in difficult questions, read the comments in the IJ. And just go through, after a Marin Voice piece is published, or there's a statement by the editorial board, or something happens, and you see the dialogue and you see where people's fears come up, or you see the NIMBYism, or you see the challenges around what the facts are. I mean, Jonathan, you said there are facts, that I see every day, and we hear every day people challenging what those facts are, and people claiming to be truth tellers. And we've got to fight that, and we've got to stand up to that. And we have to be the ones who bring our voices into the conversation to say, hey, wait a second. And that's why the resources and the books and the documentaries and the literature and the articles and the journals and all of that stuff that we can compile and come to the table with and say, look, you know what, this is what it says. Did you read the covenants and restrictions in this deed document? Did you read the color of law? Have you seen, what are the kinds of things that we can help to put on the table and just say, you know what, this is what it is. And this is the reality that has shaped how you think, I think, we think in our community. And we can do better, because everyone deserves all of the things that have created a life of respect and dignity for you, for me. And there are people who don't have that, and there's no reason why that shouldn't be the case. So it's continuing to help to shift mindsets every day, and to be the one who, if you see something, you say something. If you don't understand, you ask a question. If you are deeply challenged, you go back to the number one thing that's going to sustain and create sustainable social change, and that's personal transformation. You do the work of looking in you and sitting down with yourself for a good hard moment and saying, hey, what's going on for me here? Why is this something I have such an intense reaction to? What am I going to do with that energy, and how am I going to channel it, and who am I going to talk to, and where am I going to go to find a space of peacefulness within myself before I go out and lash out? And we talk about love instead of hate. That's where it's got to start. We have to be willing to have that compassion with ourselves in those moments of incredible difficulty where we're on edge, or where we're triggered, or we're feeling a traumatizing moment or re-traumatizing moment. We've got to be just really clear about what that looks like in us in order to take responsibility for what we do next. And when I started talking, I mentioned, what's the next right step we're going to take? I think that's where we have to pause and bring awareness and intention into that next step. So that's what I would share.
Thank you, Chandra. That was so well said and so powerful. I really appreciate that contribution. I can see.
I love it. I love it when she goes after me and not before me.
Yeah. I can see the three of you, and then I can see Dave in the corner going, wow. So I know he's impressed. Don, anything to add on the conversation of reparations, or any closing thoughts?
Yeah, to put it simply, for descendants of slaves in America, reparations is the other side of the coin of justice. You cannot separate justice from reparations for descendants of slaves.
Yeah, thank you. So before we wrap up here, I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much. This has been an incredible conversation. And I know that our community out here in West Marin, we have our close, tight-knit community, but I've heard from so many people that they're really interested in getting involved beyond just what we're dealing with at home and in our smaller communities, and building bridges to some of the bigger issues that the county is facing as a whole. And so if you could speak to how our community can make a bigger impact right here and throughout Marin, where racist policies are causing real harm right now. And I'll start with Chandra.
Yeah, sure. There's two immediate things that come to mind. In addition to what I've already said, I would say join a nonprofit board. Get on a board, get active in your community. If it's not a nonprofit board, it's a community center, it's a Rotary Club, it's a something somewhere that you can be a voice at the table that raises your hand and says, are we talking about racism in this space? Because we need to. And be willing to start that conversation. So be active, make a commitment to not be part of a silent majority, right? You started this presentation with your equity statement at the community center, and it talks about moving from silence into action, I think. That's my paraphrasing of it, but I read that in what you're saying. So I would say to make that commitment is incredibly important. So do something in that vein. The other thing is to think about who are the candidates that are running in November locally. Who are the people who you don't know what their platform is? If it's your party, but you don't know that person and you are thinking, well, I've got to vote for the Democrat or I've got to vote for whomever, find out what that person's agenda is. Find out about their commitment to racial and economic equity. Find out about what they're willing to do and how they're seeking to do it. Bring this conversation to them and say, you know what, I want to be part of a solution. What are you going to do to help me foster policy change that's going to work in this county? How are we going to have that dialogue? So I think those are two immediate ideas that I would put on the table.
Thank you. And Dawn?
Well, I really suggest that we support marginalized communities' leadership with our allyship and with our financial support if we can afford it. I think that communities know what they need, their leaders know what they need, and what we need to do is help them get people out of the way that we may have more influence on nudging out of the way of them moving forward. So that's my approach.
Thanks, Don. And Jonathan?
I come back to where we started, this notion of the community center just doing what the community center has always done, but in this moment, in this context, where race relations are strained. We're all dealing with COVID, but the community center is stepping up to bring people together, to have tough conversations, to learn together, to grow. That's what you guys are doing, and I sort of come back to that as a concept that's scalable. You know, when we think about Marin County, it's a community. 260,000 people is a pretty small town, or medium-sized town. So collectively, when we all think about sort of Marin as a community, and we think about how do we come together to have these tough conversations, to really grapple with the long-standing challenges and inequities in the county, I think we end up in a better space. And so, some practical things that I've seen done, and Dave has actually been a great leader in this space. I remember, some years back, we got together and we started talking about how do we just connect kids from the Valley with kids in Marin City. Paul Austin, great colleague, worked with us as well. And I remember a bus of kids from Marin City coming out to the San Geronimo gym and teen center to connect with other kids, from, maybe 40 minutes away, 30 minutes away. And it was a really beautiful, beautiful thing. And it may feel and sound, hokey, but there's some real power in just connecting people with each other, identifying with each other's humanity. And so to the extent that, we can think about ways of doing that at an individual level, but also, community centers creating these opportunities for our communities to connect. It feels like a really important step in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And before I thank our panelists and send us on our way, I want to take a moment to share with you all a bit about one of the actions that the community center is taking to address the inequities in our communities right now. And the Marin Community Foundation has been an incredible partner and funder of this work. And in the early weeks of the pandemic, the community center was acknowledged as a lead organization in West Marin. And in 1 week, we developed a financial and rental assistance program, the COVID-19 Emergency Fund. And it's designed to keep families afloat in uncertain and unprecedented times. And as we know, COVID-19 did not serve as the great equalizer that it was discussed as early on. We saw that the virus disproportionately impacted the people who are already on the margins and people of color in our communities. And that we've distributed over $250,000 back into our community over the last 4 months. And I want to give an opportunity, if this is the type of work that you'd like to support and support a family in need. Jack is going to put a link in our chat box if you feel like making a donation that will go directly back to a neighbor, supporting those folks who are struggling during this time. And with that, I want to say a huge thank you to Chandra, Dawn, and Jonathan for being here tonight. This was an incredible experience for me to get to be a part of this conversation, to get to connect with you all. And I am so, I'm so honored to be your colleague and working in Marin with all of you and in this space. So thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you. And you kicked off our Community Unlearning speaker series with incredible form. And I'm going to take this off screen share so we can all give some claps, and you can unmute and say thank you.
Thank you, Alexa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to see you guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alexa. Thank you, Dave.